Yeah, how's it going, Jack? So, which topic did you want to discuss, and what is your position on that particular topic?
I guess we could talk about the claim that atheists are morally bankrupt. I don't take that to be a true proposition.
Okay, so you believe that atheists are not morally bankrupt. Why do you believe that they're not morally bankrupt?
Well, I mean, I guess it depends on what we mean by morally bankrupt here. Does that just mean there's not going to be like a sufficient metaethical grounding for like any normative claim that an atheist would make?
You could say it that way. Yeah. I mean, essentially, what it means is
Okay.
that any position, any moral position that you hold as an atheist, the reality of morality is what? What is the point of morality? It's to weigh actions. It's essentially to say this particular action is a better action, this particular action is a worse action, right? It's to essentially give it some sort of gradation. So when you say it is better or it is good, and this particular thing is bad, you're saying that one particular action is more justifiably sound or more justifiably a position or an action that you should take versus should not take. And the question is why? From an atheistic perspective, what is the reason why that particular position is a position that you should hold or you should be doing? Like, for instance, the golden rule. Why should we do unto others as you would want done unto yourself? Why is that a reason? And the reason is typically always the same. The reason is because that's how I feel, right? And if that's the justification for it, then anybody's position on why their particular reasoning is as it is, and if it's because of how they feel, then you're basically saying that that position holds the exact same weight as any other position based on people's feelings. So that's why it's moral bankruptcy.
Yeah,
Do you
I don't
understand?
think that's the case. I mean, I think there's plenty of ways to hold to a moral realist view as an atheist. Like
Okay.
myself, I would affirm a moral realist view. So I think there are like mind independent moral truths. I think moral statements, number one, are propositional, meaning they can be true. And I think some of them are true. And I think they're made true by some mind independent feature of reality. So, I mean, there's nothing incoherent about this view, and I
Like
could
what?
give productive arguments in favor of this view.
Yeah,
Would you
like
say?
what particular position would be true, a moral position that's true from an atheistic perspective?
Yeah, like moral realism would be true on my
Okay.
view as an atheist. I'm not speaking for all atheists, I'm speaking for myself, right?
Okay, yeah. So what would that be? Explain what you
Yeah,
mean by that.
moral realism is the view that moral expressions, number one, represent truth values, so they're propositional. And number
Moral
two, that
expressions.
some of those moral, yeah, it's going to be a conjunction of three different claims, is what I'm saying. Moral realism is going to be a conjunction of three different claims that are all true. So the first
Okay.
claim is going to be that moral expressions are propositional, which means that they're truth apt. The second claim is going to be that some moral propositions are true. And the third claim is going to be that they're stance independently true, that those moral propositions that are true are stance independently true.
Okay. So in other words, they don't depend on any human minds in order for them to be, well, wherever they're stemming from, they're not stemming from any stances at all. So how do
Yeah.
you come to that? How do you come to that conclusion that these morals that you depend on, or whatever they're founded on, that they're not founded on any stances at all? Where do they come
Um,
from? Where do they emanate from? What is the essence of them?
so they would just be characterized as being non-natural properties. And the way it's talked about in the literature surrounding metaethics is that what it means for it to be a non-natural property is that it's irreducibly normative, which just means it has a sort of essence such that when we try to characterize the nature of this property, we're always adverting to some irreducibly normative relation. So basically,
Okay. You still there?
yeah, sorry, I was getting a phone call. So
Okay.
basically, all I'm saying is that these moral truths are going to be non-natural properties, and what it means for it to be a non-natural property is that it's irreducibly normative, and that's an epistemic claim because I'm making a claim to the status that these properties exist, and that they're binding, but I'm not making a claim to like the nature of these properties.
Okay,
Like
so
what they
like
are.
what would be an example of a property that exists that is normative, that is also not dependent on stances? What would be an
Yeah,
example of that?
like a moral property would be an example.
Okay, can you give me one moral property that like what it would be, what that particular moral property would be?
Well, yeah, it would just be the state of affairs that's determining the truth value of any given moral proposition. So the property is going to be indexed to the specific proposition that is being made true by the property. So if we have like a proposition like it is not good to grape people, like that proposition is going to be true on my view. And what makes it true is going to be this mind independent, stance independent, non natural moral property.
Yeah, so what is that if it is mind independent, but it's coming from your mind, how is it mind independent? I don't see how you're classifying it as mind independent, but it honestly just sounds like pretend to me. It sounds like you're just pretending because that's like me saying, "Hey, I don't like the color red," but I'm not. It's not based on what I think. That's based on some metaphysical, meta-ethical property that is just there, and you have to accept my claim. But you're claiming that it's meta-ethical and not dependent on stances. How is that the case if it is dependent on stances? It is
It's
dependent on
not.
your mind.
I mean, this type of reasoning would apply to everything, right? Like you can't get outside of your mind at all. So that means everything exists in your mind. I mean, it's absurd. I'm
No,
saying that there's plenty of deductive evidence in favor of this view. I'm prepared to give the deductive argument that establishes the truth of this.
okay, yeah, sure. But just because it's deductive doesn't mean it's not mind dependent. It's still mind dependent. Just because it's deductive doesn't make it stance independent. So I don't know how
No, if the argument is deductively sound, meaning the premises are true and it's logically valid, then yeah, the conclusion that's entailed would be true. And the conclusion would be affirming that there are mind independent moral truths or stance independent moral truths.
what are the premises themselves? Are the premises objective or are the premises presuppositional? Are they
I mean, I could just give
inductive?
the
Are they
argument.
abductive? Sure. Yeah, yeah. Go ahead.
Well, obviously, so the argument's going to be following like an inference rule, like modus ponens. But I could just give you like the argument if you want.
Yeah, that's fine. Sure, you can go ahead.
So the first premise is going to be that moral reasons exist. If moral reasons exist, they're either stance dependent or stance independent. Are you writing it down?
Yeah, I'm gonna write it down.
Okay. So the first premise is that moral reasons exist.
Okay. Moral reasons exist. What are moral reasons?
Yeah, moral reasons are just going to be normative concepts that have a predicate concept of accounting in favor of accounting in favor relation.
Well, I mean, and we're going to go through it because it's a lot of jargon, so I'm going to make sure that I understand what you mean and you know that I understand what you mean. So, moral reasons exist, right? Now, moral reasons are, you said, a normative, say again?
They're going to be like a normative concept. Reasons are going to be normative concepts,
Okay.
and those normative concepts are going to have a predicate concept of like accounting in favor of relation.
Okay, and normative concepts, what does that mean to you and what does that mean in reality?
A normative concept is just going to be a non-monadic predicate constituency relation between the agent and the nature of the concept itself.
Non-modative predicate. Okay, so it's jargon.
Non-monadic predicate.
Yep, so it's jargon on top of jargon on top of jargon. So non-monative, what does that mean?
These are technical terms. These are technical terms, by the way.
Yeah, yeah, it's no problem. I want to make sure that we break it down so we understand it. So
You should invite
non-monative.
Kaysen up, by the way.
What's that?
You should invite Kaysen.kn up, by the way.
Well, we'll do that after we nail this down, and then we'll see if we can get him in. So non-monative, what does that mean specifically?
No, I said monadic.
Oh,
M-O-N.
monadic. I see.
Yeah,
Okay.
M-O-N-A-D-I-C.
Non-monadic.
Yeah,
Monadic.
that just means that they're going to be
Predicates.
relational. Yeah, that just means they're going to be relational predicates.
Okay, relational.
So the predicate that's going to constitute a normative concept, which in itself is going to be a reason, is going to be non-monadic or relational.
So when it's a non-monadic predicate, I'm not.
Monadic.
Oh, sorry, monadic predicate. If it's a non-monadic predicate, that means what exactly? I really want to understand.
That means it's a relational property.
Relational
transitive.
to relational to relational.
No, that
to
just means
what?
that it's open to relational predicates.
Okay, so you said it's relational.
Yeah, it's a
this-
relational predicate.
Okay, relational predicate. So if it's a relational predicate, it's relational to what? Like, what does that mean? Relational. What does
No,
that
it just means that it's dispositional. That's all.
dispositional.
Yeah.
Okay, it's dispositional. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's a relational. So a moral reason, a moral. Sorry. Yes. Moral reasons exist. I asked what is moral reasons. You said they're normative concepts, which are non-monadic predicates, which are relational predicates, and that's dispositional, meaning it's dispositional. So I'm still not getting to the ground of what this is. So what does that mean for it to be dispositional, a dispositional predicate? What does that mean?
Oh yeah, what it means for it to be a dispositional predicate is that it's non-inferential,
Okay. It's non-inferential. All right.
yeah,
Non-inferential.
which
Okay.
would
So
mean that
if
it's
it's
epistemically autonomous.
so if it's non-inferential, and I know I have no problem being corrected. I was corrected on this last time. That deductive arguments, inductive arguments, abductive arguments are all inferences. It's true. I went back and double checked on it. So if it's non-inferential, then what exactly are we saying that it is? What type of
No, I'm saying
predicate is non-inferential?
the dispositional nature of what would constitute the predicate as being non-monadic is what's going to be non-inferential. But that doesn't imply that the reason itself, in this case, the moral reason, is going to be non-inferential. That wouldn't follow.
So by inferential, we agree that it's characterized by or involving conclusions reached on the basis of evidence and reasoning. So you're saying it's
Well,
not
no,
based on
I don't
evidence.
take it that. Yeah, I don't take it that all inferences are going to be related to conclusions. I just take it that what it means for something to be inferential is that it's relating to inference.
Yeah, so then, I mean, if it's relating to inference, then we're talking about something that's based on evidence and reasoning. So you're saying it's not based on evidence and reasoning,
I would
correct?
say it's based on reasoning, but it's not always because you can have instances of evidence that are non-inferential as well.
Okay, so, but you're saying it's not inferential, which means it's not based on reasoning. Or are you saying it is based
No,
on
no,
reasoning?
I'm saying
And you're
again, I'm saying the
reducing the scope.
the disposition that constitutes the sufficient condition for the non-monadic predicate is what's going to be non-inferential. But that wouldn't imply that the nature of the normative concept or the reason is going to be non-inferential. That
But
doesn't
how,
follow.
okay, so how is it non-inferential if it is still based on reasoning? Unless you're just redefining inference.
Who said that the disposition is based on reasoning? It's not.
Well, you're saying that you're saying that you are just defining it as a dispositional predicate is based on non-inferential. It's non-inferential, right? So you're just claiming it. I'm just trying to understand why you're claiming it as being non-inferential, but it is still based on reason. I don't see how
It's
that.
not. So there's two issues here. Number one, I'm not saying that the disposition is based on anything. I never used that language. I'm just saying, and I never said that the disposition is relating to inference. I said the disposition is going to be identical to the non-inferential content, which itself is going to be epistemically autonomous. So there's like a two-dimensional nature to the disposition.
Okay, so I'm gonna descope that, right? And we're gonna go back a little bit because first you said that a non-monadic predicate meant that it was a relational predicate. So I asked, what does that mean? You said it's a dispositional predicate. So if it's a dispositional predicate, okay, then go ahead, correct me.
I said a non-monadic predicate is a relational predicate, and what's going to constitute the sufficient condition for any relational predicate is going to be a disposition.
What's going to constitute the sufficient what?
Condition.
Condition. Okay, the sufficient condition. Sufficient condition. So what will constitute the sufficient condition? But I'm asking, what is a relational predicate? The way you explained it last time is that it's a dispositional predicate. So if that's not the correct understanding, then what do you mean by relational predicate?
I never gave like a description of what a relational predicate is. I gave a sufficient condition. I gave a sufficient condition, which is an adequate explanation.
Okay, so what is a relational predicate?
Well, I just explained that to you.
Okay, then explain again.
A relational predicate is going to be the type of predicate that's constituted by a disposition.
Okay, constituted by disposition. Okay.
Yeah, because the disposition is constituting the sufficient condition for the relational predicate.
Disposition. Okay, so it's constituted. So a relational predicate is constituted by a disposition. That's telling me how it functions. But I'm asking, what exactly is a relational predicate? So and maybe we're just speaking past each other, but the way I would understand that, it would be like, if this is a relational predicate, here's an example of a relational predicate. That would tell me what exactly it is that you're talking about. But instead, you're saying it's constituted by a disposition. Yeah, by a disposition, which is a sufficient condition. So I'm asking then not what it's constituted by. I'm just asking what exactly that is. So what exactly is a relational predicate?
Yeah, a sufficient explanation is going to be what constitutes the sufficient condition for any relational predicate. And that is what I'm saying is going to be non-inferentially justified. So for you to ask the question of what the relational predicate is constituted by, like what the nature of the disposition is a category error.
Okay, so I'm not really nailing down what exactly you mean by moral reason, right? You said
Oh yeah,
moral
moral
reason
reason is going to
exists
be a normative
because
concept.
because yeah, you said moral reason is a normative concept, which is a non-monadic predicate, which is a relational predicate, which is constituted by a disposition or sufficient condition, which is non-inferential. It's all
No,
just
the relational predicate is constituted by a sufficient condition, which itself is constituted by a disposition, which itself is non-inferential.
yep. So it's constituted by a sufficient condition. You said, or okay,
Yes.
by a sufficient condition. All right. So it's constituted by a sufficient condition.
And that
Now,
sufficient condition is constituted by a disposition.
but doesn't that sound to you? At least it sounds to me like you're just giving me the functionality of a relational predicate instead of saying what is a relational predicate. You're saying
No, I'm
here's how
giving
it's
you a description. I'm giving you like a definite description by appealing to the sufficient condition for any relational predicate.
okay. So by sufficient condition, you mean what then? I'll just go there and maybe
A
that'll help.
disposition.
So
That's what I mean by the sufficient condition.
so a sufficient condition is a disposition. That's what you're saying.
Well, in this context, yeah, sufficient condition for a non-monadic predicate of a normative concept is going to be a disposition. Yeah.
I have to check this first. I have to check this first.
Okay.
Hold on a second. Where is my
Yo, after I win this debate, are you trying to put 1 point up for the atheist side on your little picture there?
I actually don't understand why I can't see my full TikTok screen suddenly. Like, what is going on here?
Oh, that's weird.
Um, what is going on? I can't see if you're there or if you dropped or not. If you're still there, I can hear you. Okay, good. I can't see. I don't know why, but I cannot see the full TikTok screen, and I
It's
want to
okay. Just use
see.
the powers of your mind.
I want to actually see what the chat is saying, but for some reason I can't open it. Whatever.
I can read
I'm
it
just going
for
to
you.
continue through.
I can be like the text to speech for you.
No, it's cool. Actually, I've got a couple of them, but no problem. All right, so we're getting down to the brass tacks, right? We're getting to the bottom of this. What is a moral reason exists? Moral reason is a normative concept, which is a non-monadic predicate, which is a relational predicate, which is constituted by a sufficient condition, which is dispositional, and it's or a
No,
dispositional predicate, right?
the sufficient condition is not identical to the disposition. It's constituted by the disposition.
Okay, it's constituted by a sufficient condition, which is constituted by a disposition. Correct?
Yes, which is non-inferential.
Okay, hold on. Let me get that. So it's constituted by a sufficient condition, which is constituted by
A disposition,
by a disposition. Disposition.
which is
Okay.
non-inferential.
Which is non-inferential. Okay. Now, this middle part here, that a relational predicate is constituted by a sufficient condition, and which is constituted by a disposition, to me, is not giving me meaning. It's not giving me meaning. Because obviously we understand, this is all jargon, right? Jargon has to be explained by things that are relatable, things that we know, things that we understand. So I'm still not getting the relatable aspect of this. What would make all of this non-inferential at the end of the day? So
Wait,
what?
just to clarify this, are you claiming that the sense, which is the intention behind these terms and their extensions, is going to lack semantic content, or no?
No. All I'm saying is that it's lacking meaning. I'm just saying it's lacking
That,
meaning
that
and
would be the
understanding.
same as it. That would be the same as it lacking semantic content, right? Semantic
I
content
guess.
is
I guess if that's how you
semantic
define it.
content is semantic content is just linguistic content that you can derive meaning from.
Is that the case?
Yeah.
Semantic content is the meaning of words and sentences and how they mean how that meaning is conveyed. Okay, sure.
Yep.
Yeah. So then I agree with you. Yes, it's lacking semantic content. Sure. Sure. So
Yeah. So
and that's why I
say
said
so.
we need to have relatable terms or some examples that can make it easy, not just for me, but easy for anybody who's in the audience, anyone who maybe they do understand, maybe they don't understand. So what is this middle part here? The
Hold on, before we
relation.
move on to that, like you just
Yeah.
claimed that it is the case that the terms lack semantic content, right? So does that entail that they don't have coherent reference? Like all of the terms that I've used
See,
don't have coherent reference?
this is more jargon. So I'm gonna have to pull that up. What is coherent reference?
No, that's just what it would mean for something to lack semantic content.
Okay, so but
Like,
why
you
use
know what
something
reference is?
synonymous? Why use something synonymous when we can use the semantic content, the terminology semantic content?
Well, because meaning isn't going to only consist in reference. Reference is going to be an aspect of meaning, but there's going to be like a further condition for the meaning of anything.
Okay, a coherent reference is a relevant and well-cited reference that helps to establish a logical flow of ideas in a written work. Sure, I can accept that definition.
Wait, hold on, real
So,
quick before we move on, can you look up what is reference in philosophy, just so we're clear on that?
sure, yeah, no problem. Reference philosophy. Okay. So reference is a relation that obtains between a variety of representational tokens and objects of properties. Okay.
Yes.
A relation that
Do you know
obtains
the type? Do you
between
know
a
the type
variety
token
of
distinction?
representational
Do you
tokens
know?
and
Do you know
objects
the
of
type token
properties.
distinction? Do you know the type token distinction?
No, I don't know about that.
A type is going to be like numeric identity. A token is going to be like qualitative identity.
Okay, I'm gonna write that down. So type, you said is numeric or token is
Yeah.
numeric. Okay, type is
No
numeric.
type.
And then token is
Qualitative.
qualitative. Okay. Okay. So, I mean, I don't know why it's not just called quantitative. I mean, that's more common. Quantitative. So I'm just going to write it down there. Okay.
Quality is different from quantity.
No. I'm saying I'm not sure why it is called numeric or why it's referenced as numeric instead of quantitative. I think that would just be more common, just commonly used. But that's okay. I'm just putting it down for my own notes. Okay. So what I'm saying here is that this is not giving me much meaning because the layers of jargon is not getting me to a point of reference, and by reference I just mean experiential reference that we can ground our understandings and our meanings in, because semantics are all grounded in experience. That's how we understand words, that's how we understand meaning. It's based on what types of experiences we have, and then we put words to them, and then that conjures up some sort of a feeling, an emotion, a thought, a memory, and so on and so forth. So I'm not getting anything from this, and I want to be able to get it right. I want to be able to understand where you're coming from, so I can understand your worldview. That's what my platform is all about. It's about understanding other people's worldviews, breaking them down, deducing them, and seeing if they have any holes or gaps in them, right? So what you said was relational predicate is constituted by a sufficient condition, which is constituted by a disposition, which is non-inferential. But I'm still trying to ground that. So what do you mean by a relational predicate just because it's constituted by these other terms, this other jargon? My question is how that additional jargon gives it meaning, because it sounds more to me like function. It sounds more to me like how a relational predicate functions as opposed to what it actually is. What does it mean to be a relational predicate? Like an example would probably be a good way to dispel the lack of meaning and understanding.
Yeah, I mean, just to clarify this, the relational predicate is going to be constituted by the sufficient condition, which itself is going to be constituted by the disposition, but that just means that the relational predicate is going to be referring to the same concepts that would constitute it as being a relational predicate in all possible worlds where that relational predicate obtains or could obtain. So it's more of like a modal claim going on there by me appealing to like the sufficient condition. And that modal claim is going to allow for it to be in conjunction with like a necessary token. Because we would
But
take that
what
concept across all possible worlds.
what I'm trying to understand is why is it so difficult to provide an example of what you're talking about? Why is that so
I already gave you an
challenging?
example of what? A non-monadic predicate?
No, I mean an example of a relational predicate.
Yeah, so like being taller than is an example of a relational
Okay.
predicate.
Okay, so being taller than is the than a necessary part, or is just taller sufficient as a relational predicate, or the than would be
No,
itself the predicate, right? Okay.
the expression is going to contain like a non-monadic predicate because it's relational. Because there's no way to be taller than being taller than something.
Okay.
So
Okay.
that's
So we're
like an
getting
example of a non-monadic predicate.
cool. Cool. Okay. So we're getting down to the brass tacks of it. Good. So then relational predicates would be something like better than, right? Or well, if I wouldn't say, I'm not sure if good itself would be a relational predicate or bad would be a relational predicate, but if I said better than or worse than, that would be a relational predicate.
Well, hold on, just
Correct?
to clarify this, but not all predicates are relational. Because, for example, like you could say that because for any given relational predicate on this view, it's going to be transitive. So it could be the case that there's like a predicate where you say like you're predicating like of what it means to be human. So if you say like Bob is a human and Jack is a human, then it would follow that like Bob is Jack if they were relational. So it can't be the case that like all predicates are relational.
Yep, and I understand that. And you're not saying this is just relating to relational predicates. So the opposite of a relational predicate would be what would you term that?
A monadic predicate.
Monadic. Okay, that's where we go. So it's non-monadic. So monadic predicate. There we go. Okay. So monadic. Cool. So we're talking here moral reasons, or sorry, moral reason exists, right? That was the first premise. Moral reason exists.
Yeah, but existence is taken to be a predicate there.
Okay. So moral reason exists. We said that moral reason is a normative concept, which is non-monadic. So by non-monadic, what you mean by that is that it is not a relational predicate, or it is a relational predicate. So like taller than, less, smaller than, and bigger than, and so forth. Okay, so you're saying that relational predicates essentially exist. That's what you're essentially saying, that they exist. Is that all you're saying? Like, these sorts of relational terms that are predicates, they exist. But
Well, again,
where's
premise one is just saying that moral reasons exist, and the reasons are going to be normative concepts, which in themselves are relational predicates. But the point of them being like relational predicates is just that they're irreducibly normative.
So I
So
think
it's not.
we're missing something here, because moral reasons or moral reason exists. You said a moral reason is a normative concept, right?
Yes,
But
because
what would
a
be
reason is accounting and a reason is accounting in favor of relation.
okay? So what would be an example of a moral reason then? Maybe that would be probably easier to connect the dots.
An example of a moral reason?
Yeah.
Well, like I said before, because this argument is establishing that moral reasons are going to be irreducibly normative, then I'd just be making a claim to like the epistemic status or the conceptual nature of these reasons. So for you to ask like, well, what's an example of a given moral reason? On this account, if the moral reasons are irreducibly normative, then that question is going to be a category error, right? Because it's just not going to be within the domain of what it means for it to be a moral reason to ask that type of question, since you're not able to access the nature of a moral reason for any given moral reason. We're only able to have conceptual access to it.
So if we're not even able to provide an access or to provide an example, even a metaphysical example or a physical example, then how do you make sense of moral reason if it's not metaphysical and it's not even physical? So then what is it exactly?
Well, again, like I said, what it means for something to be normative is that it's characterized as having some like epistemic status that is going to be irreducible. So that's all I'm making a claim to. And what I'm saying is that that relation that obtains, whether it be an accordance relation, a fittingness relation, a directive, these are all going to constitute it as being normative. And what I'm saying is in virtue of that, we can't make a claim to the actual nature of what these types of reasons are, but rather the status that they do exist and that they're binding. And we could give like deductive evidence in favor of that.
Yeah, I'm having a hard time following you there. Then I'm really having a hard time because if it is something that's it's a normative. You said normative having epistemic status, right? Is that what you said? Or did you
Yeah.
say non? Yeah, you said normative having epistemic status. So what does that mean? That to me doesn't have much value in terms of meaning. So what do you mean by that? It's normative having epistemic status.
Yeah, that just means that there's going to be like translucent conceptual access between any given discursive intentional state and the nature of the normative reason itself.
You're gonna have to use more. You're gonna have to use less jargon if you really want me to understand. I want to understand. So if you can use less jargon, and we're literally like 10 layers deep of jargon at this point. I think the only thing that you've given that is not jargon is essentially relational, predicates, which are greater than, less than, bigger than, smaller, and so forth. So people want to understand, right? If this is the correct worldview and it correctly describes the world as we see it, I want to understand it. But it's not intelligible if we have this many layers to get through. So moral reasons, and it's possible maybe you just don't have a good example. I don't know. Maybe somebody else has a good example, or maybe you could bring one the next time. I'm not sure, but if moral reason, and we cannot define and isolate or give something that has meaning, or that has a connection to our human senses and our human mind, that relies on experience in order to understand. We don't just rely on arbitrary, or sorry, not arbitrary, but abstract ideas. Even abstract ideas are based on real experiences that we have, right? We know what a line is, we know what straight things are because we can experience them. But moral reasons are normative concepts, which are non-monadic predicates, which is a relational predicate, which is constituted by a sufficient condition, which is constituted by a disposition, which is non-inferential. That to me has literally no real world meaning. And
That's
I'm not saying that it's your fault. I'm not saying that it's your problem. I'm just saying that we need more of a basis. We need more foundation in order to
Wait,
gain
hold on,
meaning
but
from it.
just to clarify this, like what I brought up last time is like when you're bringing up like these issues with like meaning, and you agree that that's just going to be that's just going to mean that like the terms I'm using are going to lack semantic content, then you're basically critiquing my theory of reference. You're saying like, well, the sense, which is the intention behind the terms I'm using in their extensions, isn't going to have a coherent referent. And I'm saying, well, that just implies that you're saying that all of the terms I'm using are going to be referring to like an empty set or something like that, or that they're just going to be not even in principle be able to refer to anything that would constitute them as having some sort of semantic content. So you
Yeah,
need to sort of justify that.
yeah. No, I'm saying that because it lacks semantic content, and that means that it does not transfer meaning over to the individual who is receiving, then it doesn't have real world value. If, let's say, you were to speak to, 100 people in a room, and you were to say what you just said, and let's say 90% of them did not understand what you were saying, then does that conveyance, does that delivery have real value? Or versus somebody who comes in with a very simple syllogism, for instance, they tell you the universe began to exist, or anything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe had a cause. Very simple, Occam's razor, parsimony, right? And that conveys meaning to 90% of the people in that room, then it's going to have greater value. So whatever information you're trying to impart, in whichever way that you're trying to describe your worldview, it should have referential
Yeah, but hold on.
examples
Before
that
we get
help
to
us to
this, like
understand.
we already pointed out that you weren't aware of like what reference was in philosophy of language, right? You had to like look it up, and you didn't even understand what it meant for it to be like a token of like a
Yep.
mental state for any given like
Yep.
attentional state.
I
So I
have no
think that
problem
just
learning.
that just
None.
means you should probably step aside from like the semantic critiques. And the point is that like even if I grant you, which I'm not inclined to do, that the terms that I'm using lack semantic content, it's not going to follow from that they're not justified, right? That my view is not justified. I can still provide like a justification, and on my view, like I said, it's going to be a non-inferential count of justification. You
Yeah,
haven't really done any
but you've
work to
got to.
critique that. Like, do you
But
have an epistemic defeater for
yeah,
my account of justification?
I mean, you would have to. Well, I don't know what your definition of evidence is, but definition for
I'm
me
asking
of
if you have a
evidence.
defeater. I'm asking if
Yeah,
you have an epistemic defeater for my
I'm.
justification.
I mean, I would say this is an epistemic defeater. Is that evidence is that which inspires belief, and a belief in the claim that you're providing. So if your evidence is not inspiring belief in other people and not allowing them to understand it and to connect the dots, then I would say it's not evidence to me. It's just like
Wait, hold
somebody were
on
to
there
say,
just a second. Sorry, just to clarify this, hold on there just a second. You said that
yeah,
you did have a defeater for my justification. What are the
yeah.
two types of what are the two types of defeaters in epistemology? And tell me which defeater you're referring to.
Yeah, well, I'm not in the confines of your epistemic worldview,
It's
and
not
so
my in contemporary
I mean,
philosophy. There's
whoever
two
has
separate
determined
types
it,
of defeaters in epistemology. You don't know the two
whoever
separate types
has
of defeaters in epistemology?
whoever has defined those particular types and put them into categories, to me, is of zero consequence because what I consider as being a defeater is that it did not. There's no evidence
So
because it
just to
has
clarify
to.
this, you made the claim that you do have an epistemic defeater, but you don't know the different types of epistemic defeaters in epistemology. That's fine.
Let me
Seems
let
like
me
you're
look it
not
up.
clear
No
on what you're
problem.
saying. I think you should. Seems like you're not clear
Epistemic
on the nature of the
defeater.
critique that you're with.
No problem. So an epistemic defeater, defeaters in epistemology, says,
Undercutting and
where is it?
rebutting.
An epistemic defeater, broadly speaking, is that in terms of which the defeat of justification proceeds. Okay. A
Look up
defeater of a
what
belief is
what
evidence that this belief, sorry, hold on, is evidence that this belief is false. Okay, so I would say in order for
that
it to
would be
be,
an undercutting defeater.
yeah, okay, and defeaters are of particular
Look up
interest.
look up the two different types of defeaters in epistemology.
Cool, let's do that.
What are the
Two
different types
types.
of
Two main types, rebutting and undercutting. Okay, so rebutting defeaters provide evidence
So
directly
what
contradicting a belief.
what defeater do you think you gave towards my
While an
justification?
undercutting defeater undermines the evidence supporting a belief without necessarily offering evidence for the opposite belief. Well, it might fall under the second one then, because I want you to understand what I mean too. So if you're using this as your semantics, that it may actually be a rebutting defeater because it's not, well, it's maybe, sorry, an undercutting defeater because an undercutting defeater undermines the evidence supporting a belief without necessarily offering evidence for the opposite belief. So I would say it's not even categorized as evidence yet. It hasn't qualified as evidence because
Wait,
evidence.
so just to be clear about this, you're saying that
Yep.
you're giving an undercutting defeater for my non-inferential justification.
Well, simply because of the fact that
Yes?
this is just the first premise. So we
That
haven't
was like
gotten
a yes
through.
or no question. Do you want to
Well,
try one more time before you
yeah,
move
so
on?
we haven't gotten through all the premises, so you haven't given your full argument. So I'm
So
not
do you want to
saying
answer the
I'm not
question
saying
before we
yeah,
move on, like yes or no?
I'm answering it. I'm answering it. I'm not
So,
saying
well, yes or no.
I'm answering
This is
it.
yes or no
I'm not
question.
saying that this is even a defeater. I will take back
Oh,
if I said
okay.
it's a defeater. I'm not saying it's undercutting, nor am I saying it's rebutting. But what I am saying is that it
You don't
hasn't.
have a defeater for my
No,
justification.
no,
Just to
no.
be very
What?
clear.
No, I'm not saying I have a defeater. I'm just saying that you haven't provided anything that translates over into evidence
Wait, just to
for
clarify
your
this,
particular
now you're
claim or
walking
position.
back your claim. Now you're walking back your claim that you have a defeater for my justification, correct?
Yeah, I don't have a problem with walking that back.
Okay,
No problem.
great. So now
I
your
don't
claim is
mind.
that.
I don't mind learning, and I don't mind being wrong. I can be wrong. Everybody can be wrong. So what I'm trying to do here is understand what you're saying. Because if you're saying moral reasons exist, and I can't even understand what moral reasons are, then the problem is you haven't conveyed information yet. I'm waiting for the
But I've already
information.
pointed out, again, when you said that the terms I was using to provide a sufficient explanation of what moral reasons are
Yep.
lack semantic content, it was clear, and you even conceded that you don't know what reference is in philosophy of language.
Yeah,
How
but I
could you
looked
make
it
a
up.
claim? How could
I
you make
looked
a
it up.
claim such as that my terms lack semantic content if you don't know what reference is? You look terrible when you do that, right?
Yeah, but
You're not
I
well
looked it
read.
up. I looked it up.
Well, you didn't actually levy a critique. You just said you feel like it didn't convey meaning. You're just appealing to your fifis. I want you to
No,
give
but
like a
no,
justification.
actually, okay, so we'll go back to reference. What does it say for reference in philosophy? Reference is a relation that obtains between a variety of representational tokens and objects. And you said that tokens are qualitative and the type, I guess, type is numeric and tokens is qualitative. Now, it
Wait, hold on,
doesn't
but it
use
says
type,
it just to clarify this, it says representational tokens, right?
yep, and
So
objects or
what's
properties. It
what's
doesn't
the
say type,
wait,
though.
hold on. What's the distinction between representational tokens and inferential tokens?
Well, you're going to have to tell me because this is your worldview. So I'm
It's
trying to
not my
learn your worldview.
worldview. These are technical concepts in formal philosophy.
Yeah, but it's based on your worldview. So it's still your worldview.
Not based on
I
my
mean, I
worldview.
mean, look, I could like literally sit here and go through, what is haqq? Haqq is truth. But I could tell you what that is, right? But then I could tell you, well, what is haqq in its deeper meaning? It is al-Islam huwa al-iqraru bil-lisani wa tasdiqu bi-qalbi bi-anna jami'i ma ja'a nabi Muhammad. Right? I could tell you all that, and you'd be like, dude, I don't know what you're saying, right? And
It's
I could
literally a
tell you,
different language. It has a
but
completely
it
different
but
syntactical structure. You
yeah,
look
but
lost right now. You're
yeah, but it
confused.
doesn't matter.
So
Either way,
just to be very
eith-
clear about this, you made the
all
claim
language.
that my
Hold on,
terms
hold
lack
on,
semantic
hold on,
content, right?
hold on. All language has essentially the same basic components as a subject, a verb, and an object. Every single language. So if I'm not giving over meaning that is grounded in something that's experiential that we can refer to, and your worldview is one that uses lots of jargon, then it is upon you to demonstrate it. That much is something you have to at least
Just to be
accept.
very clear, you're levying a critique that has to deal with the nature of how I'm building up a theory of reference, but you've made very clear that you don't even understand the distinction between practical and discursive intentionality, which is going to be sufficient to give an explanation or justification for any given token mental state,
Yeah, but you
which
do
would be
realize
sufficient
that
condition in
you do
itself for there to be any theory of reference. So you're
you do
terribly confused and
realize
you're not well read.
you do realize
I literally have a master's degree in philosophy and I have a
I
verbal
don't
IQ of 179.
I don't have a problem with that, but you got to understand that
I
you
listen to classical
still
music on a daily basis. I listened to Gustav Mahler's
dude,
First Symphony just an
none of
hour
that
ago.
matters. None of that matters to the point. The
I can
point
see
is,
music in abstracta.
oh my God,
I can
man,
sense I can sense
look,
abstracta.
look, I'll just put it this way. If it's about you, then sure, you're going to continue to talk about, your qualifications and who you are and so
What's
forth.
the
That's no
difference
problem.
between definite
But if
descriptions and
it's
proper
about,
name?
dude, just hold on a second. If it's
But you
about
don't know anything
conveying,
about philosophy of language,
can you
just to be
just
very clear about this.
can you just relax for a second? I want
Once
I
you
want us
concede
to
that
have
you
a
don't know
dialogue.
anything about philosophy of
Dude,
language, please.
I want us to have a dialogue, okay? Please. We've gotten a lot done today. We've gotten through a lot of technical jargon, and that's great, no problem. But we're at a point where I'm saying, look, it's upon you. You may understand everything. Did he leave? You may understand everything in the world, but if you're not able to convey that information in a way that is intelligible to the recipient, then you still have some work to do. That doesn't mean
Hold
that
on,
you're wrong.
just to be very
Doesn't
clear
mean you're
about
wrong.
this.
I'm not saying you're wrong.
You're the one. Just to be very clear, you're the one who wanted to engage with a formal
Yeah,
debate
of
proposition,
course.
which that atheists are morally bankrupt. You from the
Yep.
proposition. I gave my argument, but you
Yep.
don't understand these entry level technical concepts required to have a substantive conversation about the proposition in a linear fashion. You low tier slow boy. So what I want you to do is concede to
So it
me
was
and
about you all the time.
tell me that I conceptually cucked you in this conversation right now.
So it was
You
about you the
Brussels
whole
sprout
time.
looking fuck. You look like a Brussels sprout. I want you to tell
No
me
problem.
that daddy conceptually cucked you. Say, Daddy Jack, you conceptually cucked me in the conversation. Say it right now.
From the beginning of this conversation, you haven't provided any grounding of any meaning. You
Say,
haven't
Daddy
conveyed
Jack,
that
you
meaning.
conceptually
I
cucked me in the
wish,
conversation
I
and say
wish,
it now, boy.
I
Boy,
wish you
I
were
said say it now.
I wish you were a genuine person who actually would engage with somebody so that you can transfer that meaning and understanding. And you know what? Maybe I would agree with you.
Yeah,
Maybe
I
I would be on the
apologize for
same
getting
side as you.
rhetorical on you there.
I
Maybe
will
I would
say I
be
am
on the
trying
same
to
side as
engage
you.
with you. I'm definitely engaging your ass cheeks with my rhetorical dick in this conversation. I want to make that very clear. But one thing I need you to do is read Entry Level Philosophy of Language.
Do you have anything else to say? Anything else to share?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to talk about philosophy. I love philosophy,
That's great.
and
We
I
could
want to
talk
know if
about
you're
it,
open.
but I'm asking you for some grounding. We got
I'm all
down
about
to
reflecting. I'm a man who reflects,
yeah,
and
but
so I want
people
to talk about philosophy because that's really the nature of reflection and abstract reasoning, the ability to manipulate these concepts in such a way. I'm autistic. I have Asperger's, but I was diagnosed before it was ASD, and now it's just ASD, but it was Asperger's when I was diagnosed.
it's what's really strange right now is the fact that I literally cannot do anything with this TikTok screen. It is frozen.
Oh, you would have kicked me?
No, I wouldn't have kicked you. I actually don't have a problem with you being up here.
If
I
we
have a
were talking
problem.
in real
I have
life,
a
like,
problem
because
with you being
I know we
rude.
would probably have a charitable, we would probably have like a good, honest dialogue if we were
Yeah,
in real
but the
life right now.
problem is when you're behind a screen,
Yeah.
you take on the mask of anonymity, and that allows you to act in a very
Well, no, I've got
disingenuous
my
and
face here as my profile picture. I'm not hiding anything. I mean, there's
yeah,
not
but
much
but
more
that
I can
doesn't
do.
that
But
doesn't mean that you're a
I
good
just
person
wanted to know,
because
like,
that doesn't mean
if
make
we
you a
were
good
having this
person.
well, if we were having this conversation in real life, and me and you started getting a bit aggravated with each other, what would you do if I reached over and I kissed you on your mouth?
Dude, look, the
I
main
just want
point
to
is
know, like, it's a
I
genuine
I
question.
actually I actually don't care about any of that other stuff. I want to understand your worldview. If you could just provide an example, just an example of what it is that you're talking about when you get
Okay.
down to relational predicates, what do you mean? Just give me
So
something.
the relational predicate is specifically going to be referencing the determinate negation, which a determinate negation is going to be a proper function of an absolute negation, which is a negation of a negation. So it's going to be a sublation because that negation is going to be conjoining the previous negation, which came
That's not
logically
helping.
prior.
That's not
Well,
helping.
basically, I'll put it to you in terms of formal logic. It's the negation of the interpropositional dependency relations given existential quantification in quantified modal logic.
How many people are in this chat right now? I cannot see
31,
anything.
31 people. We also have a
Okay.
logician, Monkey Boy, in the chat.
Okay.
He's a
So
logician.
so
Same
if
with
there are
Rebel.
if there are 31
Rebel's a
people,
logician.
cool. So if there are 31 people in the chat, honestly, I want the people in the chat to try and make sense of what he's saying. And maybe everybody gets it, sure. But what I really want to understand is if people can try and descope what he's saying and just type it in. Here's what he means. Because maybe he's not able to convey that information to me. Maybe somebody else can convey that information. In fact, I can't even add anybody into the live right now. I wish I could add more people in. Then other people could discuss it. And we could get down to the brass tacks and understand exactly
But
what we
you're a
all
man
know.
that enjoys reflection, correct?
Absolutely. That's why I'm here. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to reflect with you and have an honest conversation about philosophy.
Are you? You literally just called me a bunch of terms that were clearly rude and disrespectful. That was not moral at all, and that was not respectful. It
I
wasn't kind.
apologize.
So I don't know why if
Well,
you're
I'll
really
give you the
if you're
reasoning
really
for it.
genuine,
Yeah, I mean, it's because the reason why I got rhetorical on you like that is because it's sort of embedded in me from being in these philosophy circles for so long. I just like have this desire, this impulse. It's almost like it's a part of my nature, like it's beneath even my own consciousness, my own awareness of my own mental states. It's like some sort of aspect of my nature that makes me get rhetorical like that,
so
and I can't
doesn't
control it.
that tell you that maybe this rhetorical or philosophy, this worldview, if it's leading you to a place that doesn't make you ultimately feel good as a person, as a human being, that maybe you should take a step back and kind of reconsider. Because
I
to
mean,
me, anyone could throw
yeah.
up a bunch of jargon if the jargon doesn't convey the ultimate meaning of what you're trying to say to those who are the recipients, then you have to do it. And this is not something that I'm just saying. This is something that mathematicians talk about. This is something that theoretical physicists talk about. They talk about the fact that they're dealing with a world that is very complex. And so they even have to create new types of words, but they still have to make it make sense to people, right? So, and I'm just saying, you haven't done a great job of conveying that. You've done a good job of layering jargon, which is not even a knock against you. It's just you've got to do an additional, an additional step of just bringing it down. Bring it down a little bit, and let's get to some fundamentals and foundations. That way, we can build upon that and understand each other. That should be the whole goal of communication. I mean, unless it's just about, destroying this one, destroying that one, that I don't think has a lot of value. So that's how I see it. But yeah, otherwise, I mean, I would love to bring up the next person. There's probably a bunch of people in the queue. I have no idea what's going on. My TikTok is completely frozen. What I'm going to do is I'm going to close it down and then I'm going to reopen it. That's the only way I can do this. So let me open up my task manager. Come back. Will you come back when I reopen it?
Yeah, I will.